right. So, a little bit of Grateful Dead there. We also heard Bob Dylan, You Ain't Going Nowhere on the Basement Tapes, and Velvet Underground, Pale Blue Eyes. So, if you are just tuning in, if you're following us on the social media, I'm with Matt from Orchid Eden right now. We're going to chat about that new record. But first, let's chat about what's going on live. There's very few restreams or actual live streams. These are most part in-person events. Oh, can you hear my trepidation in my voice when I say that? Okay, so tonight, the 99ers at Mears Park. That is an outdoor show in downtown St. Paul. Speaking of outdoor shows, Kiss the Tiger, I believe, is going to be taking it to the Ice House outdoors. Otherwise, I think Ice House has that, like, the Bob's Country Bunker sneeze guard thing going on. So it indoors is safe as well, but they're going to be continuing their residency for their release of Vicious Kid this entire month. Also on Thursday, All the Pretty Horses and Maida at the Hook and Ladder Theater, and Kingfield Porch Fest. This is a zero waste event, so if you don't live in the Kingfield neighborhood of Minneapolis and you're visiting just to see the music, please pick up after yourself. It's a neighborhood. People live there. It's also a really fun event. It's fun every year, so please enjoy that. Friday, Pop at France. That features Dan Israel, and Dan is a man about town. He's playing a lot of gigs, including Stone Arch Fest, which is back on. We also had the summer sessions, Maria Isa, Keg and Case. That's an outdoor show at the Keg and Case Market starting at 6 p.m. on Friday. The Flamin' O's are going to be at the Burnsville Event Center. Same with Molly Mayer. Saturday, Stone Arch Fest, of course. Curtis A in Burnsville Event Center. This is all part of the relief sessions. The Suburbs are also going to be closing that night on Saturday. Hook and Ladder, Lady Lark, Sophia Eris, and Louis Blaze. That is also going to be on Saturday. Sunday, Stone Arch Fest is going to conclude every year on Father's Day. Looking ahead, Javier Trejo is going to continue live streaming from the Terminal Bar, but also I believe you are able to attend that in person as well. It's still going to be streamed. And my next show, I'm actually on Stone Arch Fest with a lot of great musicians. I did Katie Vernon, Dan Israel, Lydia Liza, Goodnight Gold Dust. Lots of great local and regional acts are going to be doing stripped down sets for the outdoor COVID regulations. We're also going to have a marching band, apparently, so that's going to be fun. But my next show is at the Caboose, only every Monday. If you are keeping score at home and actually are interested in what I do outside of this box. But let's actually focus on what's important here, because I am in this box. And I'm with Matt from Orchid Eaton here. And let's talk about this record, because I was listening to this, and usually when you're making a record, you're trying to chase that feeling of like, oh man, this sounds like a record. But I feel like this record sounds like a movie to me. Like it has very cinematic qualities, and it's a super enjoyable listen. It takes you places. And normally my first question when I ask people on this show is like, were you passing tracks back and forth during quarantine, or was this completely made before the everything happened?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate you checking out the record and having me on. This is awesome. Yeah, and it kind of a strange thing to consider, right? That we're gonna
right
actually see, real live music in front of real live people. It's like
right, yeah.
It's that whole thing is just completely shifted, which is awesome.
It's great, but it's also like I think I make this joke too much at this point, or maybe my anxiety disorder does, but it's just like, oh yeah, it's great that I have shows to promote again. Oh God, what if people show up? Like that's kind of. I think luckily most people's events, including mine, are outdoors, but I think it's there's just still that moment of like, hey, I think I'm still processing last March. Let alone this March.
But it's like everything is returned so fast. It's I was sort of dreading promoting this record of actually playing a lot of these tunes live, because they're pretty much studio constructions up to this point. So my nightmare was somebody asking me to like, hey, play a song from the record. And I'd have to, be like, I don't know how to play my own music. Sorry.
How would you manage performing? There's a camera. I shouldn't block it. But how would you manage performing because you were sending tracks back and forth, yeah? So this was kind of the studio was as much of an instrument as the instruments played.
Yeah. Have you? In answer to your question previously, yeah. So it was some of both. I mean, we did a lot of work on it pre-COVID, but definitely the finishing part of it, especially mixing, was done all throughout COVID. But I mean, the nice thing about this particular project is Brian Moen, my bandmate, and I kind of started when I was living in Minneapolis and he was in Oakland. So we kind of, that was back in 2016, 2017. So we kind of had a pretty decent, workflow about working remotely when we weren't in the same room. And now he's back in Wisconsin. So we definitely meet up more often in person. But it's still kind of like, we like to work on our own time schedule too. We both kind of have studios in our homes, and it does kind of that whole process of working kind of having more control over that process always made me feel like the end results were better. That was one of the limitations I always struggled with in previous projects, of kind of like trying to cram an entire record's worth of material into like 2 or 3 days and never really feeling results. So I mean, there's downsides to working on your own too, that you can kind of get lost in your daily output can suffer depending on how formulaic you are. But yeah, I mean, it works for us, and thankfully we had kind of set it up so it would be able to work even through quarantine.
Right, because Brian also has involvement with other projects. Usually, have you met up to like work out this material live, or is it still just kind of like it lives on the record? That's where it lives and breathes at the moment.
Yeah, and it did for basically until a couple months ago. We did start meeting up and rehearsing, because we are going to play some shows this summer, and do kind of a live video iteration of the band too, because at the time it seemed kind of unclear about when live shows would return, and whether we would play any of this material out live. So we're still going to do that, but yeah, I mean, for sure, the prospect of playing shows again is definitely happening. So yeah, we're rehearsing this material and kind of figuring out how to approach it in a live context right now.
Well, let's take a listen to this a track off this record, because I don't want to keep talking about it and then be like, okay, let's not listen to it. So let's listen to Blue Light off this record here. And if you're following at home, we are live stream chatting. Just please don't do it while you're driving. It gets saved on all of our pages. You can watch it later. But if you're playing along at home, thanks for joining us. Here is New Orchid Eaten here on KFAI. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, perfect. This is always like the weird part of the transition, because I have to like type out the metadata of your track and then set up all these other things. So are you both in Eau Claire, or is it just Brian?
Yeah, just Brian is in Eau Claire. I grew up there, but I live in Minneapolis.
There's a lot of cool musicians out in Eau Claire. Like there's like a lot of talent. There's something out in that part of, I mean, like I think I've only played out there a handful of times, but I remember like a lot of the young musicians are like really, really already accomplished. So you grew up, is that where you and Brian met?
Yeah, so I was kind of like, Brian definitely was a part of that scene when like Justin Vernon was still playing there too, and kind of not what he is now.
Right.
Like
Right. Was he in
there was
the
some
shouting matches?
Yeah,
Or
so
is
Brian was in the shouting matches with Justin, and then Brian was in like the thing that really made me fall in love with like him and all of his projects was this band called Amateur Love, which was him,
Sure.
Josh Scott from Aeroflin, and then
Aeroflin. Whoa, I remember them.
Brad Cook and Phil Cook. Brad Cook's like a total ace producer now, and Phil Cook he's an artist in his own right too. Plays with His Golden Messenger and does his own songs too. But they they have this awesome kind of like, it was sort of in this similar vein to Halloween Alaska, but like with their own sensibilities too. But yeah, I mean, since then, like I've loved everything that Brian has done. And he recorded a previous project I was a part of called Emot, because I loved his sensibilities and his recording style, and we kind of hit off from there and stayed in touch. And then when I was working on these new tunes for this project, sent it to him totally like unsolicited, and he was all about it. So that's kind of how it started.
I'm glad you pronounced it, because I was totally about to call it emote on the air. Putting that two and two together. It's one of the lyrics that like really got me, is just because and at this point there's too many helicopters flying over my head, so forgive me if I'm just totally butchering or paraphrasing the lyric, but like just the concept of like my foundations of non-belief, or like or something. That is just like, oh man, ain't that a vibe for me. And which is like kind of like peeling back the layers of this record of just like how it just like, yeah, it's just incorporated into the all that is. It's just, this has just been one of those records where it's just like, yeah, this is kind of a lot of stuff I've been thinking about, and it's a really listenable record. Like the production on it is outstanding, especially since like you were just kind of sending tracks back and forth. Like you really captured like the room sound, like that analog tape hiss like doesn't sound artificial. It sounds like musicians in a room together, which is super cool.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you checking it out and having that thought. I mean, that's really where, like, you know, beyond the song construction and stuff, just in terms of pure recording, that's definitely something we're going for, is like, you know, analog sound that sounds real, you know. It's like, and that's always the hang up I have with recording at home, is that you do, you know, it's very easy to make stuff that sounds good and sounds serviceable, but it's very difficult to make stuff that sounds like a performance, you know.
Right. That's something I've always struggled with, but I'm also not too much on the recording aspect of it. Like I've always focused on like that has to sound like a live performance for better or worse. Mm-hmm. Like the limitations of like the equipment, and I think I've been talking with a lot of artists about this, where it's just like nowadays recordings are almost not always an accurate representation, because like you said, where it's just like you had more time to actually like pass this back and forth with Brian and like really craft where the soundscape was going, where nowadays, like, okay, say you get enough money to go down to Pachyderm and make things sound really nice, and that's awesome. A lot of times when musicians do that, they are working with a budget that kind of puts them in a position where it's just like, all right, we are kids in a candy store for 48 hours.
And like, you know, if you're really well rehearsed, like you can probably make it work. But yeah, I mean, that was always my struggle, is like, even in nice studios, you know, you're limited by the amount of time you have, and you know, for making something that I felt comfortable with, and having the ability to, I think, to delete and start over has been so liberating too, that like sometimes it's just not working, and it's okay to trash it and start over, you know.
Right.
And I think too, just kind of like, whatever happens with kind of the business end of things, that's, I wanted to like, and Brian's kind of in the same boat too, just to set ourselves up so we could continue to make stuff that we're happy with, and that has sounds that we're excited about, and be able to do that without being constrained by, a recording budget, so to speak. Obviously there's,
right.
Yeah, we can kind of keep doing this as long as it feels good to do it.
Yeah, and there's like I mean, I don't want this to turn into like a class warfare debate, although it seems like everything in America is. But like, I feel like the budget sometimes, like, it isn't an accurate representation of the musicians, because like sometimes musicians have to travel just to get to the place, and it's just like, like a real musician will get the take. It's like, not when you're like decompressing and this is like, oh, we just got here and then we have to play and then we have to like, even if you get a take, sometimes I feel like being well rehearsed is also like audible on tape sometimes, where it's just like, because I've definitely had to, running a failed record label in the past, definitely have to work with musicians where it's just like, all right, we gotta rehearse this thing. And even though you listen to the record, you're like, it's fine. Like, it sounds over-rehearsed. Like, it sounds like the feeling isn't there. It just sounds like musicians trying not to mess up. Yeah. but the emotion and the soul of a live performance, like, you don't always get that, because you're like, all right, looks like the budget is gone. Well, we got to get out of here. We got to leave.
Totally. And chasing the vibe is really where... Yeah, that's first and foremost with this project too. It has to like live in a zone that, is not always, I'll kind of like do this to myself when working on tunes, especially for this project, is, things aren't synced to a grid, on purpose. Stuff might be a little bit out of tune. There's noise there, but like all of that adds to a sense of veracity to me, and like kind of interesting.
Right.
People that are into production will purposely add waver and noise and things to like give that same emotional quality to that.
And chasing the vibe is such an intangible thing, because like I feel like you can spend so many times like trying to dial in the tone, and then it's like if you don't zoom out of the micro, and this is why people work with producers who can just be like, hey, you were really focusing on that synth tone, when like it's okay if it's a little out of tune. It actually works with the other ingredients in like the sound palette. And so I am amazed that you recorded off the grid, because you could have fooled me. I would have put a grid right on this thing. So like, how did that work when you're sending tracks back and forth? Because I feel like I have enough of a time, like it's like when you collaborate with someone and you open up your like I would like open up like Ableton and just be like, oh, Ableton doesn't like this, does it? Okay, I'm gonna like it, just like even like sending those back and forth. Like, so you went gridless. How long did this take to mix?
Yeah, well, Brian mixed all of it, and yeah, he's a superhero for that too. And like, I don't want to misconstrue. We did kind of do a hybrid setup, but for me, when I'm doing basic tracking, I have gone into linear workflow, not because I'm like 100% in on analog. Like, computers are super useful, and like analog workflow appeals to me because it does get to that aspect of like linearity and like crafting parts that don't just work in isolation but work throughout the whole song, and like getting that sense of a performance. So like, a finished take will take a lot longer to get there, but once it does, it's like that piece is done, more so than like, all right, I got all these little ideas that I like, but I kind of have to figure out how they fit together. But for us, a lot of it does start with like a drum machine or, something that has some standard rhythmic, if it's a metronome or whatever, there's something there to like guide it.
It's
but it's
like
way
this weird, yeah, it's like this weird cross between a jigsaw puzzle and a mandala. Like there are elements that can be completely swept away, but there are elements where it's just like, well, no. We need the corners before we start doing that. And so, do you think because you would meticulously arrange some of these pieces, that is going to stand by. Okay, so that is a brand new 26 Bats tune that I missed. I didn't get a radio edit on their last track, so I missed the boat on it. So I guess it's technically a leak. I don't know. Who knows? 26 Bats is a cool band. Check them out. Local music there. We also heard new local music from Taba and new local music from Orchid Eaton. So and now I just lost completely my train of thought of what we were talking about in the studio. I guess the crux of the point we were talking about on the online session is when we were discussing just recording technology of making an album like this. Do you think the meticulous arranging and just actually feeling it out and working with the sounds provided and the directions of sounds you have in your head, do you think that is informing how you're going to rehearse for the live shows and like how to flesh out this material for live performances? Like, does this help actually like, oh, this is how we're going to deconstruct this? Or is there going to be any deconstruction? Are you going to try to like make this as close to the record as possible? Or are you going to rearrange and be like, no, this is what it needs to be here because it's a live performance?
Yeah, I think kind of the latter. I mean, it's like the record is the record, and but I think there's a lot of purposeful, at least in terms of songwriting process, to make these songs work first and foremost as like they can be played by just me, or they should be able to stand alone on their own. And like just from the amount of overdubs there, I mean, at some point it would be amazing to like tour or even play a couple isolated shows with like 3 or 4 keyboard players and just make it totally fleshed out. Every single part is reconstructed. But yeah, for the live iteration, I mean, there's Brian and I, and then a bass keys player. So yeah, we're kind of like, stuff gets trimmed down, and we do try to boil things down to like their essence, so it works in a more stripped down context. But that's kind of a fun challenge too. It's like really reimagining these songs, and kind of like for myself too, you were mentioning like getting lost in just kind of the minutia, but it is kind of like a constant task of boiling things down to their core of like, what is the central communication point of these songs, and how do we emphasize that, Absolutely.
And you already answered my next question. So if for the folks listening at home, if they like what they hear, where can they hear it again? Where is this record available? And do you have any performances on the books that you would like to announce here? Or and feel free to say no if I'm giving away trade secrets if you're not, if you're not set to announce yet. But where can listeners hear this again if they really want to?
Yeah, so probably the easiest place is to check out our website. It's orchideaton.com, but we're on all the major streaming platforms, whatever format you like to listen to. I mean, I love Bandcamp for various reasons, so it's there. But yeah, everywhere you'd listen to music, definitely check it out. And yeah, for summer shows, we do have some coming up. We've got one in Eau Claire on the 1st of July at Phoenix Park, which is kind of part of the Volume 1's yearly outdoor concert series.
Oh, nice.
We're going to do a solo show on the 2nd out in Minnetonka. It's kind of an outdoor setup. I can look up the details, but there's more details on the website too. But then, yeah, we'll have some more shows through the fall as well that we're not quite ready to announce yet, but there will be some coming up.
Well, stay tuned for those performances. And get your ears on the rest of this record. I highly, highly recommend that. If you're just tuning in, this is Desert Islands here on KFAI, the show where I make mixtapes based on my guests' 10 records they would bring to a desert island. And we're going to hear more from that list in a bit. But first, we're going to hear this.
This station is supported in part by...
If I don't get these underwriting things in, I forget, and then they pile up, and I have to play like 6 of them in a row, which is super professional.
The FCC nailing you.
I think luckily we are a big enough station that people take notice, but I think we are still a small enough station that like most of our listeners, if they hear some sort of profanity on the air, most of them are just like, that's funny, rather than like, like calling it up. And but I guess that there's a greater lesson in that, like it good or bad, consistency is important. I think it only happens, the pitchforks only come out if it's like consistently like, okay. Honestly, I think that's like kind of like what put like Howard Stern on the radar. I was just like, I think he was like deliberately trying to like violate FCC things to get people to tune in or whatever. But like that's usually kind of how it works. So one of the things I want to geek out on in the list is this John Ryan record, because I'm familiar with the scores.
Oh man!
But I did not know this was a thing. I did not know he had just a record of his own contemporary music.
Yeah.
Because like his scores are like some of the most. It's like audio Xanax for some of it, but like just to hear his mind in like a. I don't want to say pop music sensibility, but like what else do you call it? Like I feel like pop music is a generic term that's like, yeah, it's not Baroque, it's not hip hop. What do you call it? You know, like, but I had no idea, and it seems like he only made one record like that.
Right, and it's just so shocking. I mean, you feel like, given the circumstances, he could probably have cranked out like 25 or 30 records or something by now, but right.
Yeah, I get the sense he didn't really want to.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I read an interview of his like a few years ago, I want to say.
Yeah,
and this record has kind of taken on a total status after the fact. Even though at the time it was sort of a bust by
right.
Early aughts record company standards. Yeah, my God, I hope he does, because it's incredible. It's so well put together and so emotionally resonant. And I love everything he does, including his soundtrack stuff too. Yeah, it's just
and I think that might be why he hasn't moved on, because I just feel like that the soundtrack gig, like once you're in there and people trust you to do that, it's a pretty nice place to be. But that's a good point, especially like if that record came out at that point. Like look what happened to other serious, like complex pop music statements of that time. Like I think it was just coming out of this era that we'll never see again. The 90s in the record business was like you were just making money hands over fist as a middleman in this industry, that like anything that didn't replicate that, it just wasn't good. And there was like a lot of bands who were making great music from like 99 to like 2004 that were just like, no. Like Yankee Hotel Foxtrot got Wilco dropped, so like I can totally see like when this record came out, like by by industry standards then, they were used to a lifestyle they could not maintain. And I don't think they knew that at the time. I don't think anyone does. I think a lot of that is like stock market crashes, where it's just like there's definitely insiders trying to cash in on the grift, but the rest of the landscape fallout is just like, it all happened so fast. I was thrown clear. I do not, like But
like,
yeah,
I'm sure record companies now with like, you know, the budget even to this point, it's like, you know, you think of like a couple years ago when Billie Eilish won, you know, a Grammy, and like they didn't get any advance budget and just recorded that all at home for the most part.
Well, I mean, it's like Justin Vernon, like going up like for Emma. Like I feel like, but I feel like it had to happen that way. Like, do you think a record like Billie Eilish's debut gets made if she was like industry plant from jump, where like they tried to manufacture everything? Like, I don't think For Emma Forever Ago is a record that gets made today. Well, maybe because Taylor Swift made Folklore, but like not like I don't think like if Justin Vernon's Bon Iver journey started with the eponymous record, went all the way where it was, and then he tried to put out For Emma, like, do you think that gets made if he's not completely on his own anyway?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
It's surprising. I feel like he like the latter steps that were available even back in like the early 2000s are just like all of that has kind of been hollowed out too. Like even in our local environment, like the City Pages is gone, you know, Vitamin is gone. Like those, it's like there's a pretty wide gulf between, you know, everyone releasing music just into the ether, and then like, you know, the people that are in that echelon. It's just, it's harder to like get almost, you know.
And it's so weird because like I mean, AC/DC's right. It's a long way to the top, but also I feel like the top means different things now. Like some things are meant for a certain time and place, and some things are meant to be like just sonic experiments. But it just reminds me of that like Frank Zappa rant, where he was just like, I'll tell you, man, the industry was run better when it was run by suits, you know, like, because like back then they didn't really care what was cool or what was trendy or what was the next best thing. They would let artists kind of challenge the form, stretch out, do weird things, because they were just looking at the binary code, the ones and the zeros, who's moving units. And to them, if a band wanted to make like a really, really crazy, out there, whoa, weird record, to them it's just like, are there kids who are going to buy it? Yeah, sure, let them do whatever they want. Like, if the kids are buying it, let them make it. But now it was taken over by the kids of the suits, who were like, oh, God, my dad's so stupid. All he cares about is cocaine and cigars, man. Like, we know, we're on this, we live it. We know everything. And that like, it got ruined by this, like, this rock canon, like, of just like, oh, we are responsible for helping the greatest music ever recorded to come to fruition. So only our opinion matters. And it became like this weird, like, insider trading banking scenario where like it never was a meritocracy, but it sure as hell isn't now. Like some of the best stuff doesn't see the light of day because,
right,
you know, either like mental health, or people who don't want to play the game, or people who just like, they don't, you know, they don't want that kind of exposure, or they didn't want to change, you know. Like sometimes people, they make great records on their own and then they get signed and then they get focus grouped to death, and like the record comes out and the original fan base is just like, man, this band changed. And then the record company is just like, yeah, it's just not working out. It's like there's just so many factors to why it just ain't the way it is anymore. And as like I definitely, like what you said, like it's like you feel like you're screaming out into the ether. I definitely think that is a feeling shared by many, but at the same time, like it's never been more possible to like carve out your own little niche existence in the fractal where it's just like, yeah, you only need 2,000 people to listen to this record. And,
yeah,
and that's
100%. And I feel like even my own experience, like there would be no way that I would be have the capability to make the kind of records I want to make, even,
right.
20, 25 years ago. So like,
Yeah.
I appreciate that, but I do appreciate the, like, people being able to be curated and having a longer term view of like, this person might not be a success now, but we want to invest in like a career of, cause like, I really appreciate that too, that, there can be some baked in longevity, and it's not just like, are you a flash in the pan today? Yes or no, and if you're not, then there's lots of other people that could be, because I think there's a lot of value in all perspectives in music, including like, awesome teenage or younger or older. Like there's room for all of those perspectives for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I used to tell my students, just because like so if people don't know this, I actually have been a music teacher with St. Paul Public Schools for 10 years. So that means like I get like first through high school, and a lot of the younger students don't really think this, but right when you get to the teenagers, you get like that mindset of like the guitar tough guys who are like, man, this band sucks. It's just like, no, that band doesn't suck. You don't have to like that band, but that band doesn't suck. They're actually really good. Anyone who makes records and gets into the industry happens to be really, 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 really good. What I say is like, look, if you think that band sucks and they found success, then they're just gonna love you. Like if you think your stuff is like, oh, I don't want to be that, then there's totally room for what you want to do, what you want to create, and what you want to put out there. The game is always going to be the game, and I'm not going to pretend to understand it because I don't know. I definitely don't make music for I don't want to say mass consumption, but like I don't think anyone does anymore. I like if that's the only reason we're making music. Yeah, I don't know. This becomes a completely different conversation all the time of just like, well, wait, what am I doing this for? Because not gonna lie, like the just how 2020 went, it definitely changed my perspective of just like, well, wait, what am I doing this for?
Oh, yeah,
like there are aspects of the game and playing the game are just like, they're so discouraging. It wasn't until like you just strip it down and like go completely unplugged and play your instrument for the sake of playing it, where I had to rediscover like, oh right, this is fun.
Yeah, right. And is that like in this process of us, reopening, especially, people that make their living on the road and things like that, that there is like some sort of reckoning, societally or otherwise, where we're kind of reevaluating what it means to be an artist in society. Because I feel like we've been baked down so much to like basic essentials. Like, are we, and like COVID is like taken all of the, communal artistic activities away from us for so long. And now it's thankfully coming back. But like, I think it's a really good opportunity for people to be like, well, what does society, do we want art, and how much do we want to invest in that? And is that important for us? And like, we want our venues and opportunities to play for people to look different, and how is it going to look different? Like, so from my own perspective, like, I hope that that's a conversation that still happens. And
I definitely think it happens. I just don't know if it happens in certain rooms.
Yeah, I mean,
if that
like,
makes
for
sense.
some people, it's just like, all right, back to business as usual. But it's, I totally felt that too, of like, what is there's got to be some basic intrinsic value to making music and making art that is completely removed from anything else other than like, this is meaningful to me and may be meaningful to other people too, but like at its core, like it feels true to me. And that's really like, for this project especially, like that's always the guiding light, is like, this has to feel true to me.
Yeah.
And if it does, then chances are that there's people that will see that truthfulness too, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I guess the thing that I learned as far as like, because this is a subject that I feel really passionate about, but I had to learn the hard way that there are folk that just completely do not care about your point of view. You know, like especially because I've met a bunch of people who are like, no, we do need this. We do need to gather. We do need to kind of collectively come together and blow off steam or celebrate or mourn or grieve. But there is a significant chunk of the population that does not care about this. To quote my friend and great musician, who unfortunately is no longer with us, Tucker Sterling Jensen. We used to go to the Plums open mic a lot, and we would have these conversations because a lot of killer songwriters would test their stuff out at that open mic and just kind of like commiserate and tell like war stories, and it was a good hang. But like whenever this conversation came up, he would just say like, you know, when it comes down to it, I don't think people like music that much. Not in the sense where it's just like, oh, people don't like music. I mean, like, did you ever see that it was it's called In and of Itself, and it's like a it's really good, but it's like a magician doing a one act of just like kind of telling his life story, but he kind of talks about that while he's doing card tricks of just like, yeah, I got so good at that, and then I got frustrated because people didn't see the beauty in it that I see, and it took me years to realize like that's okay. You know, not everyone sees the weird technical weirdness where it's like, oh man, he used a diminished chord in a pop song. Most people are like, and who cares? But it's just like, so not everyone gets that out of it. Stand by here. Harry Nielsen here on KFAI. We also heard Big Star, John Bryan, Ambulance Ltd. I think that is a huge that's almost a Mount Rushmore of artists that I feel like are criminally underlooked in a sense. So we're just kind of waxing poetic about how music is just kind of valued individually and weighted differently depending on people's experience and depending on how people gather. And this is kind of like the spirit of this show on Desert Islands, is just like talking about, I think it's a way more intimate question to say like, hey, this music is important to me, whether or not we want to deep dive into it or just have it in the background and talk about it and like have it stimulate the conversation. But when you make a mixtape, like the 10 records you bring to a desert island, especially, so I really like the way you assembled this list, because there's definitely some things where it's just like, oh yeah, like, well, if I was on a desert island, which Velvet Underground, which Bob Dylan, but also like there are a lot of different genres on this top 10 list, and you provided some great local and regional music, which we will get into. But sweet. of this list, I mean, we have Big Star, we have Radiohead, we have Scott Walker. What was the record that discovered you first on this list? Like, did you listen to something and then uncover Scott Walker through the journey of influences, or did that kind of spiral out from that one seed? Which record found you? I guess it doesn't have to be chronologically, or like, But like, I don't like asking what is the most important thing, but like, where did it start?
Yeah, I mean, of the records on that list, probably for me, like like going back chronologically, I'd probably have to say like the Radiohead Kid A was one of the first records that was, you know, I found it so confounding when I first listened to it. Like, what in God's name is this? Like, this is weird. But it didn't take very long before I found this, like, you know, for most people, obviously, it's a classic record. And I think a lot of my picks do tend towards that, you know, those iconic records, but with a few left turns in there. But yeah, I mean, that record still like holds up so huge, and just its not only in, you know, its communication, because it's so you know, all the things that it was trying to tell us in 2001 are still very much apparent, you know, and like relationship to technology that's completely you know, broken down, and even continuing down further in this rabbit hole now that we've been living this way for you know, longer than that now, 20 years, God. But yeah, just how it's constructed too. And I feel like I still really respect people that have achieved that level of success and are willing to just throw it away and follow, you know, where the artistic direction leads them. And I feel like that, that ability to be fearless and to take a risk. I mean, and certainly a lot of people have followed that, you know, before and after too, but it's still just such a really interesting inflection point for that group. You know?
And of course, you know, like it's kind of weird too, because I always held Radiohead on this like pedestal as like the example of like, oh yeah, you can totally do it, you can totally navigate this industry. And then I completely forgot about, like, you know, a lot of those artistic risks were bankrolled by that Creep money. which no hate on Creep, I love that song, and I actually think Pablo Honey is an underrated record, but like a lot of that artistic freedom came from this early business success that like, but it is inspiring for them to like put that money, rather than like blow it, invested into like, well, let's just keep exploring the artistic nature. So like in that regard, yeah, I will always hold them in my heart as like, man, I love that. I love the fact that you scored a lottery ticket, and rather than like trying to chase the high of replicating that, you chose to grow and expand. And sometimes sometimes they would expand like a tree, like the roots are just going underground and going into some weird places, but sometimes they would sprout and go to places in the sky where it's just like, I didn't even know you could do that. I don't even know what that is.
It's inexplicable. Like, I love the, like, texturally speaking, just the sounds on that record it is pretty hard to pinpoint like what things are. And I still enjoyed that aspect too, of like blurring the lines between, you know, not being able to pinpoint a sound, but having it be emotionally resonating for some inexplicable reason. And that one for sure was like one of the first ones, but and then usual progression of Velvet Underground and Bob Dylan and the Basement Tapes.
Oh, of course. And those are artists where it's, I think everyone has artists where it's just like, which record? I want to put this artist on here, but which record do I do? And especially some of these records where it's just like, especially the Basement Tapes, because that, like, my first band was a bluegrass band, so like a lot of those songs are like I knew those songs before I listened to the Basement Tapes, and you go, oh, okay. I do think in a weird way, music does kind of choose you and find you. But what record do you choose? What record do you find yourself going back to? Because like, I definitely will talk about artist discographies where it's just like, yeah, I think, especially Radiohead, they're one of those bands where it's just like, yeah, I think the Bends and OK Computer are a better record than the King of Limbs. And yet I still listen to the King of Limbs like a lot. Like there's just something about that record that keeps me coming back. Of this list, what do you think, where do you find yourself going? Like, do you find yourself going to like the earthier tones of like the songwriters and Lou Reed, or do you go soundscape and texture when you're trying to unwind and listen to this music?
Yeah, I think it, like for me right now, I've like really the genesis of this project was, and this record wasn't on the list, but it was a record by this band called Sagittarius, called the Blue Marble, which like tracing back, this guy Kurt Betcher was like a foundational member of that, and it was like a studio band only.
Sure,
came to find out that he was from Eau Claire, Wisconsin originally, which is insane. Because
speaking of a tiny blue marble.
So that whole thing was like, whoa, like crazy. And he was really instrumental in kind of this like kitchen sink approach of like this totally light, overblown studio creation of light psychedelia, where they just like had harps and strings and horn sections, like, and tape manipulation, the whole 9 yards, like everything.
Yeah.
And it was very much in the easy listening, kind of like maybe lyrically a little bit underbaked, but like sound wise, amazing. So like that record I really got into hard. And that kind of like opened this whole door of like all these, you know, kind of like psychedelic pop type records from that era, both like really musically resonant and also just like, you know, weird one-offs of like people that were like, huh, Sgt. Pepper was a thing, maybe I should try to do that. You know, like,
right, exactly.
And that continued on for like, you know, whatever, 4 to 6 years after Sgt. Pepper came out. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And I still feel like I'm in that vein. Like I'm still discovering new bands that are like really resonating with me, just in terms of like sonic, sure, but like songwriting too. That's like, there was just a different perspective on songwriting that I really resonate with. Like just the craft of the song really speaks to me, and it feels like it has a lot of applicability to how to craft songs now too. So it doesn't sound like, oh, this is a vintage-esque band, but like that it still has some, it's almost like some, you know, chord voicings or like songwriting structure that can still be applied today, I think is really useful. So like for me, probably like, Scott Walker is one of those people that once I discovered his huge breadth of work that like goes from everywhere to like really gorgeous, almost like Frank Sinatra crooner kind of stuff, all the way to like bonkers, aggressive, scary drum music. Like it's just
absolutely.
So like considering somebody like that can really follow their artistic vision that far is just so incredibly inspiring. And not to mention that like all of his stuff from kind of the 60s and early 70s is just untouchable. And especially knowing that he wrote a lot of that music too, like, it's just mind-boggling. Like I don't understand how somebody can do that.
Some of it is still ahead of its time. Some of it we still kind of hear today. And I'm glad you brought up Scott Walker, because like I was literally going to play Scott Walker's track next on the list. So if you're just tuning in, this is very close to the top of the hour. You might be waiting for Democracy Now!, but this is Desert Islands. I'm your host. You can call me Doc. But this is the show where I make mixtapes based on my guests' 10 records they would bring to a desert island. Today I've been making one for Orchid Eaton, speaking with Matt of that group right now. So Matt, before we get going here, because I am a talker, I yak and yak and yak a lot, and sometimes we don't have time to play the whole mixtape. So I will be sharing that in a Spotify link to the playlist, so you can hear all the songs we didn't have time to play today. Of course, you can find this program archived on our website, but I'm going to share that as well. So we're going to close with Scott Walker, but if folks like what they heard today, where can they hear it again? Is there anything you would like the listeners to know about Orchid Eaton, this record, or anything you have planning in the future before we sign off here?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so orchideaton.com is probably the best place to go. And we are playing some shows this summer, and we just released our newest record, Where All Ends Meet, on April 23rd. So still pretty fresh for us. And that you can find that anywhere you listen to streaming music or Bandcamp, etc. And yeah, we'll have some more videos coming out this summer, live performance videos, and also some other stuff too. And we'll just be starting to ramp up and play shows again, which is super exciting.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on the show. We're going to have Scott Walker play us out here. And check out this new record and keep your eyes peeled for live shows coming up. Matt, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on the show. This is a playlist made for Orchid Eaton. Stay tuned for Democracy Now! Next week, we have Mae Simpson, so tune in for that. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I like what you said about like the where it's just like sometimes like things where it's just like can seem lyrically half-baked. Because I definitely like this is gonna be such a weird left turn, but like I like you can definitely tell when like certain artists like got into Ram Dass or something, where it's just like because I definitely went through a period where I was trying to cope with a lot of my anxiety by just kind of like, oh, like what if you just wrote deliberately mantra like lyrics where it's just like they're almost so empty and open-ended that the repetitive groove is like it's almost like you're sonically beating someone into submission. And it's just like, what if you it's because I used to do that in my own writing, but also bands where it's just like, come on, that song sounds like it was written in 5 minutes. And it's just like some songs are written in 5 minutes, some great songs are like totally written in 5 minutes. And then sometimes that's kind of like what they're going for, of just like, yeah, it's you know, you're gonna get what you get out of it. And I don't, it's just like this weird never-ending mosaic of just like, you know what, it just sometimes you would think something is like, that's not for me, and then you come around again and find something that you missed, of just like, now that hits a little different, and sometimes that's just water of life flowing under the bridge, and sometimes it's just like, you know, a chance re-listening and you're in a different mood and a different headspace, and it just takes you there.
Well, what I love about that stuff from that era is like, I have to believe that, and there's just this like really charming sense of naivete almost, you know, like that people really honestly thought that like if you wrote a solid pop song, you know, or like leaned into this sense of oneness with the, you know, humanity and earth, that like that you could feasibly change things. And like I find that's such an, to me, that really resonates. That's like a very honest energy, you know. It's like,
yes,
I think people really did believe that, like, you know, music could change the world, man, you know, like, and I think that's awesome. Like that's I still think it can to this extent. I just love that motivation.
Absolutely. It's like it came from a genuine place, and then I mean it's just like one of those things where it's like, I don't want to sound like an Adam Curtis documentary where it's just like where it's just like, oh yeah, you thought you were changing the world, but
turns
really,
out,
turns out
who
we
knows?
need to focus on
There was like execs that were like, we need to play what the teeny boppers want to hear, which is, you know, peace and love and such. But totally
true. And it's just like well, I guess, I guess it goes back to like the authenticity thing, where it's just like there's nothing wrong with having sentiments that people think are like phony. I think what matters is are they sincere? And with those records, you can tell they're sincere. And like it's because now the ironic detachment that like everyone's just like, oh, it's all a scam. It's just like now that's insincere because people are just making that like cynical music because it's trendy. You know, where it's just like where the most interesting writers, like, you know, like it's like I listen to what Jello Biafra has to say because I know it's genuine. I don't have to agree with the guy, but I know, like, I know it's coming from that place and not like this weird, you know, Sex Pistols type place with Johnny Rotten. Where it's like, say what you will about that band, but they were industry plants, man. Like, like it's. I feel like he didn't start speaking his real mind until Public Image Limited, and that's like a whole different thing, you know. But I could go on, and I should probably stop before I just go on too many tangents and this totally falls apart and I make no more sense. But now that Democracy Now! Is on, I actually do have to sign out because I got to prepare the studio for Roy Taylor. But Matt, thank you so much for coming on. This was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to hearing more music, and I hope to catch you at a show soon. I'll definitely be doing my best. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, right on, man. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Good to meet you. I'm gonna click the end stream button.